What I Just Done Read.
Good afternoon and welcome back to What I Just Done Read. My name is Max, this is my Bohemian Book Corner, and this is a book review show for books of all ages, not just those on the bestsellers list or on the new releases list. And cheers. Tea. Thank you for joining me again, and obviously if you do love books and you love getting recommendations for books, then please do all the usual. Please do like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for stuff. You know, new content and all of that jazz. No jazz. Although we are in the 30s this year. This episode. So jazz might be appropriate. Who knows? And our book today, which I have to say thank you to my friend Simon Morgan, because it was one of a small clutch of books that he donated to the cause. And it is My Bones and My Flute, A Study in Mounting Horror by Edgar Mittelholzer. Still can't say it right. But before we do that, we have the business of our word of the day, which is actually from My Bones and My Flute, and it is sybarite. According to the Oxford Languages Dictionary, a sybarite is a person with a self-indulgent fondness for sensuous luxury. You can just feel it dripping, can't you? I don't know. If you want to add an extra layer to your dandy in your own writing, you can have somebody refer to them as a sybarite, and that will let everybody know the kind of level of debauchery that they may be capable of. So as always, please take it, make it your own, and keep wonderful words alive. Okay, so Edgar Mittelholzer, born on the 16th of December 1909 in New Amsterdam in what at the time was still British Guyana. If you don't know where that is, I can show you on the map up here. It's there. That's what's now just Guyana, and I can't see where New Amsterdam is, although, again, we'll come on to this a bit more when we look at the book itself. The book does start in Georgetown, which is about there. So Edgar was born in New Amsterdam. His father, William, was a Swiss-German by descent, and his mother, Rosamond, was from Martinique. So as you can see from the photos that are on screen at the moment, Edgar himself had quite a dark complexion. He'd referred to himself as being swarthy, and even in fact would in later years entitle his autobiography The Swarthy Boy. This fact led to a certain amount of resentment from his father, because it seemed to suggest an aspect of their lineage which didn't fit in with the otherwise totally white middle-class colonial family, which was an image very much that his father wanted to project and wanted to maintain. As a result, in his childhood, Edgar was very much shunned by his father, which would sow the seeds for a number of different neuroses that would plague Mittelholzer for the majority of his life. As a result, he didn't make friends very easily, and very early on gained something of a reputation as being a bit of an eccentric. As a kind of a defence mechanism or a reaction to that, he found sanctuary in literature, both in reading and in writing as well, and that was both diary writing and also writing prose. Something which, again, seemed to just fire this resentment in his father. During his 20s and 30s, he wrote quite prolifically, and a lot of his short stories were sent abroad, were sent to Europe in an attempt to get them published in one of innumerable literary magazines. For the most part, he had no success at all. For which what I suppose today kind of must seem like a very odd reason, simply because the idea of literature and the Caribbean didn't really exist, and as a result, his work was given slight regard. Not wanting to give up on his dream of being a writer, in 1937, he took all of his short stories and self-published them in a collection which he entitled Creole Chips. Demand for his work was so low that he was forced to go door to door like a salesman trying to sell his book, which, again, in his hometown at the time, just reinforced this idea of him being an eccentric. His first full novel, Quarantine Thunder, was again sent to Europe to seek publishing and was picked up by Ayer and Spotswood. Although, because of the build-up and then the start of World War II, the book wasn't published until 1941. At the end of 1941, Mittelholzer relocated from British Guyana to Trinidad and Tobago. Whilst he was there, in early 1942, he enlisted into the Trinidad Royal Volunteer Naval Reserve. Although his military service was very short-lived, in fact only about 8 months. He was given a medical discharge in August of 1942, mostly owing to his clinical depression. And again, not surprisingly, a lot of the roots for a lot of this were this very stifling upbringing he'd had as a result of his father's disdain for him. He opted to remain in Trinidad, having earlier the same year met and married his first wife, Roma Halfhide, and at the time she was expecting their first child. The next few years are a bit spotty. I don't really know what he was up to, apart from seemingly continuing to write. He must have taken a series of quite mundane jobs to support his young family. And in 1948, he decided that he would have a better chance of getting his work into print if he was kind of in situ, if you like. So uprooted his family and moved to England. When he got here, he managed to find work as a typist for the British Council, and shortly after his arrival, kind of lucked out by having a chance encounter with Leonard Woolf, who had recently become the widower of Virginia Woolf. Leonard loved his work and was very impressed with Edgar, and agreed to publish his second novel, A Morning in the Office, which was published through Woolf's company, Hogarth Press. With that, and with the earlier success of Quarantine Thunder, really kind of gave Edgar the boost that he needed and the validation that he needed to pursue his work further. His next 2 books were published in 1951 and 1952, and after that he gave up his job with the British Council and picked up Secker and Warburg as his regular publishers for his next 13 novels. Today's book that we're going to be looking at was his 9th novel, published first in 1955. The edition that we'll be looking at here is a Corgi reprint from 1958. Apparently, this was published as A Study in Mounting Horror by Bones and My Flute, whereas originally it was published as My Bones and My Flute, a ghost story in the old-fashioned manner. Before we go any further, I would just like to say a very quick thank you to James Ferguson from the website Caribbean Beat for his article in 2009 about Edgar Mittelholzer, which was really helpful in getting some of the details that I couldn't find elsewhere. So, James, thank you. So I won't go too much further in terms of my kind of biography of Mittelholzer, because this brings us up to where we are with this. But I do want to mention that it's curious that certain people seem to consider that Mittelholzer's work is problematic. And I can't say by today's standards, because I found a few articles and essays on his work that were published not long after his suicide by immolation in 1965, that even then cite his work as being problematic. And it's to do with the fact that towards the end of his life, he seems to have had a bit of a quite of a massive shift in his outlook on life. So he was brought up as an Anglican Christian, but seemed to have lost his faith by his late teens, early 20s, and subscribed himself more to what at the time was described as Oriental paganism, Oriental mysticism, was it? No, Oriental occultism. In particular, to the teachings of Yogi Ramacharaka, which seems to have been a viewpoint that he's held for most of his life, and then towards the end of his life, he seems to have become really right-wing, almost to the point of bordering on fascist. This, coupled with, again, these growing neuroses of his, and his clinical depression, eventually, even though he was still being prolific as a writer, he was finding it harder and harder to get his work into print, to the point where publishers simply would not touch his work. And then very quickly after his death, they seem to have a little bit too keen to let his work just disappear and vanish into obscurity. while at the same time highlighting that he's very much one of the pioneers of Caribbean literature in the modern age. And I think that's a bit unfair. It just seems a bit of a shameful way to treat somebody. I mean, yes, okay, touchy subject and all of that kind of thing at the time, but even so, the man's earlier work has been cited for what it did, highlighting the cultural dynamics of the country that he grew up in at the time and these kind of things, and then just to let it... Sorry, I'm just thinking about our other shows. Suddenly to decide that he's not economically viable anymore, you know, it just seemed a bit off. I mean, I'm an escapist, and I try not to concern myself with stuff like that. I mean, my criteria for an enjoyment of a book is a little simpler than that. I mean, you know, I kind of look at, is it a good yarn? You know, that's the first thing. Is the setting an accurate representation of the social dynamics of the period? One that allows the narrative to play out against that backdrop, and one that heightens the sense of immersion for the reader, and by extension, your suspension of disbelief. I suppose you can't avoid it now. You do end up looking at things and saying, are you lecturing to me? Are you on a soapbox? Are you preaching at me your message? I suppose reluctantly, I have to kind of include that as a criteria, which is slightly infuriating. Which kind of neatly brings us on to the book itself. So, just a quick bit from the blurb on the back, which there's not a lot. They were 4 lonely, terrified people. As the days went by, the tension and the horror increased. They were gripped by forces of evil, which had been unleashed 2 centuries before by a man seeking the unknown. My Bones and My Flute. Basic sort of summary of the plot. Our main characters are, so we start with a wealthy lumber magnate by the name of Ralph Nevison, who solicits the help of an old family friend after he and his daughter unwittingly fall under a curse inscribed on a 200-year-old manuscript that was left to Nevison by a friend, a native, who lives close to the sawmill that he runs deep in the Guyanan jungle. The story is narrated from the point of our protagonist, who is this family friend, whose name is Milton Woodsley, not to be confused with the odious Mr. Woodley.
Mr. Woodley. None of your damn business.
Sorry, yeah, Milton, who's an artist, family friend, and he's kind of brought on board under the auspices of creating some artwork for Nevison's business, when in actual truth he wants him to try and resolve the issue of this curse, which manifests itself as the sound of a flute playing. And every time the person who is cursed hears it, it's just got that little bit closer. Looking at those few criteria that I just mentioned there, is it a good yarn? Yes. Yes, it is. Absolutely. As it says, a ghost story in the old-fashioned manner. Yeah, definitely. But and I don't know whether it's the setting, but it does at times make it feel more like an adventure story than say, a ghost or a horror story. Which is kind of nice, because as the story develops, Mittelholzer does very much incorporate the locale and his personal knowledge of the area to heighten those, which is really nice. The pacing of the book is fantastic. There are a few periods where, you know, there's a few kind of jumps in sort of passage of time, stuff happens, but it never feels like the book stagnates. And our core characters are very well realised, and certainly are strong enough to carry the story. Yeah, I have to applaud Mittelholzer for not sugarcoating the opinions of some of his characters, especially certain ones who have a very blinkered and a very outdated view on the local populace. Not because of views that I hold, not because of views that I think Mittelholzer held, but just because they're honest and truthful to the time and the period and the locale. Again, as I said, that just adds that element of realism to the book, which again helps with immersion. So good on you for that. Absolutely good on you for that. I mean, if you do feel like you absolutely have to be didactic with this and go, oh, you're a terrible person, you're a racist, and all of that bullshit, keep it to yourself. You know what I mean? As I said, you know, Mittelholzer has included this in here And he does it effortlessly, and he does it without feeling the need to jump on a soapbox about it. It's just there. Make of it what you will. The product itself, I kind of like this edition. Again, it is a little bit battered. I'm just going to put that out of the way for a second. It is a little bit battered, but then again, it is 66 years old. And as you can see, very, very well worn. I do love the cover art. I think it really suits the book. Although, unfortunately, since I have had it, the spine is starting to go. Oops. Shit. Sorry, Simon. But yeah, no, I really like it. It adds character to it as an artifact. As I've done on a couple of these recently, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and do my eyes now. And then I'll come back and I'll have a few sort of final thoughts before my recommendation. So, if you do happen to hear the sound of a flute, don't worry, it's only going to get closer. Hello. The eyes are in there. Okay. Right. Okay, so just some final sort of thoughts and bits and pieces on the book in general. So in addition to what I've already mentioned, while the novel itself does have a very clear single narrative voice from the perspective of Milton Woodsley, it does still come across as an ensemble piece, which is really nice, and I found that quite reminiscent of certain of the novels of Dennis Wheatley, in particular the Duke de Richelieu novels, where he tends to have his entourage around him, who are in just as much peril as our hero is. And as I said, the story itself, it weaves its way around these four main characters, around Milton, around Ralph's wife, Nell, and their daughter, Jessie. And then later in the story, they also include Rayburn, who is the black charge hand of the sawmill that Nevison runs. The story's really nice. It does keep you guessing as to where it's going to go. And what I found really wonderful about that was that it doesn't in the way that you think it's going to, which for a kind of like a veteran of horror and ghost stories and things like that, you kind of have preconceptions of how things are going to go, and it doesn't, and that's really nice. What I also really liked about it is this motif of the flute as well. It's very much in the vein of
the sword of Damocles is hanging over my head.
Thank you, Rocky. But it's more than that. It's not just about this kind of sword of Damocles that's going to fall at some point. The sense of impending doom, it's reminiscent of other works. And again, the first ones that it put me in mind of were the likes of Casting the Runes by M.R. James, or L.P. Hartley's W.S. Or if you want something a bit more contemporary, I suppose, Ring, or Ringu. Similar kind of thing. Death is coming for you. This much time is allowed. And I love that. And seeing it used in this context and in this way, it was really nice. What I also like about it as well is that they refer to the flute music itself sounding a bit like... Oh dear, I did write it down, didn't I? Prelude de l'après-midi d'un faune, or the Prelude to the Afternoon of the Faun by Claude Debussy. Which again I think is really nice because, as I mentioned earlier, the person who created the flute music was supposed to be living in the 1800s, whereas that particular piece of music wasn't written until the late 1900s, so there's that anachronistic element of it. It's a bit like this, but obviously it can't be. Which again, just adds another layer of mystery to the story, which is really nice. As you can probably tell, I am going to highly recommend reading this book. It is a great ghost story. Purely and simply that, and it doesn't need to be viewed or read as anything other than that. it's what he set out to do, it's what he set out to create, and it's what he delivered. So yeah, definitely do check this book out. And again, because it is a ghost story, I mean, I don't know if I've not seen it anywhere, but I do hope that someday soon any of my friends amongst the audio horror community may turn their attention to it, because it does thoroughly deserve it. So with that said, we can go to our eyes. And here we go, my Bones and My Flute. There we are. So I've gone with a 3-eye for the product itself. As I said, I do like it, and I do like it as an artifact because of the history of it. But it is falling apart. So, and that's my fault, I do apologise. But yeah, it's perfectly serviceable. But for the story itself, it does get a 4-eye. It is a good story, well worth your time. Almost 1 page complete. Would you like some jiggly eyes? Sorry. So what's up next? Actually, let's put this somewhere. Where can we put this? I think there might be a tiny bit of space there. There, I can go there. Next, so for the next one, bit of a change. We've been doing lots and lots of horror-based stuff and lots of ghost stories and a lot of other fantastical literature, which I do love. But for the next one, something completely different. It's kind of weird though, because it is kind of fantastical in a certain degree, but it's also technically a non-fiction book. And this is going to be Role-Playing Mastery by Gary Gygax. If you don't know who Gary Gygax is, he is one half of the creative force behind the original Dungeons & Dragons, and also, following on from that, AD&D and other wonderful bits and pieces. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting one. I think this was published in like the mid-80s or something, so we will see what this gives. Until then, get thee gone. Even so, he stayed in Trinidad because earlier that year he'd met and married his first wife. Wife? His first wife?
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 Come on, meet the wife.
Meet the wife. Kids in the oven.